Premium playmakers at wide receiver and a potential Kaden Elliss clone at linebacker. We're breaking down a few more prospects that could move the needle for the Falcons in this year's draft.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Falcons. I'm your humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. your content creator extraordinaire. And on today's daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, we are joined by none other than Tre'Shon Diaz of the Falcoholic to talk about Kyle Pitts signing his franchise tender, showing up for day one of the offseason and what that means for his future, if the Falcons free agent haul is going to help or hurt their draft strategy. And of course, we'll be looking at a few new prospects that you should be keeping your eyes on as potential fits for the Atlanta Falcons. So without further ado, let's jump into that conversation with Tre'Shon right now. So we are here with an illustrious guest. He is Tre'Shon Diaz, who covers the Atlanta Falcons for the Falcoholic, the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons. And Tre'Shon, you know, people have been tired of hearing my draft takes, so it's nice to, you know, get a fresh set of ideas, fresh set of prospects here on the pod. But how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing well. It's a voluntary workout day. So, I'm excited to be here myself, volunteering to be the Locked On guest of the day. So very, very happy to be here and get into these diverse draft takes that we will be dispensing throughout this show.
Yes, and diversity is the key there, because I feel like I've talked about the same like 8 guys over the last 2 months. And so maybe you can give us some new guys to look at in this draft cycle. So certainly some guys that you find a little bit intriguing, guys that you maybe secretly are sitting here, hoping that Ian Cunningham, brings to Atlanta. Are there any prospects that stand out in your eyes that are like, I want this guy in Atlanta?
Yeah. For me, I think Skyler Bell, wide receiver out of Connecticut, is a prospect that I've really liked more and more throughout the process. The film is checked out. He's an older guy. I think he's going to be, around 24, 25 maybe during his rookie season. And he is a transfer coming out from Wisconsin. He struggled a little bit with drops early in his career, but he cleaned it up a lot. And he's somebody that I think offers, legitimate yak ability. I think he would be the most explosive receiver on the roster if he was drafted. And he's somebody that I think can really help elevate the passing game. And it's somebody that, if Ian's all about, the premium position that he says wide receiver is a premium position, he's somebody that I think the team would be very happy walking away with. At I think 48 would be a little rich maybe based on some of the consensus boards, but if he was somebody that they could get, in round 3, I think that'd be a really sweet pickup for them.
Now, before we started recording, you mentioned a defensive player that you have your eyes on, a linebacker that we haven't talked about really extensively on the podcast, just kind of mentioned in passing. And I'm wondering if Cincinnati's Jake Golday, do you feel like is good enough to be, in the mix at pick 48 in round 2?
Yeah, I do. I think Golday is a little bit, there's some questions about his ability, I think, to be a traditional inside linebacker, but I don't necessarily think that's what the Falcons are looking for in their linebacker corps to kind of, I think finish off this room based on the moves they've made this offseason. I think he's a versatile player. I think he's somebody that they'd feel very comfortable with playing in the slot, playing down on the edge in certain pressure packages, definitely filling in that Kaden Elliss role as a blitzer and being able to do a lot of those things. Those show up all over his Cincinnati film. And I think he's got really good movement ability, just, especially looking at him from, a pass defense perspective. I think he'd really be able to complement Divine Deablo. And, to me, when Divine Deablo went down, the biggest issue was middle of the field coverage. He's somebody that I think gives you a little bit more insurance, makes you feel a little bit better about if something were to happen, that you have another guy there that can fill in that role and being able to cover the middle of the field.
Now, follow up on that linebacker point. Something I've touched upon here on the podcast over the last couple of weeks is, how much do you think the Falcons will be targeting a linebacker like Golday, who has the sort of size that you can, some people think he could fit as an edge rusher, as opposed to sort of your traditional off-ball linebacker, as you noted. And sort of that is very similar in terms of what the Falcons lost in Kaden Elliss. How intentional, I guess, is my question, do you expect the Falcons to be when it comes to adding a player like Kaden Elliss? Or, as we heard Jeff Ulbrich discuss back in February, where it's going to be hard for one individual player to replace Kaden Elliss, do they maybe go in a more different direction because they know they can't necessarily, fill that void with one sort of person? What are your thoughts on sort of that with the linebacker position?
Yeah, I do think they want to be intentional about that replacement because, Ulbricht's also alluded to wanting to get Jalen Walker in some of those situations that Kaden Elliss was in last year. And, to your point, to his point, this isn't necessarily a one guy's going to cover up Kaden Ellis' spot. So I don't think, they would then turn to Walker and ask him to, abandon all the good work he's done on the edge just to fill that Kaden Elliss role. I don't think that that's really the direction they want to go. So I think they do want to have, a prospect that they feel good about that can at least do some of that stuff, split some time with Jalen in this first year, kind of see how that goes. And then, maybe from there, pick and see, whose role they want to expand on more moving forward, whether it be this new rookie, whether it's Jay Golday, or maybe they, really like what they're seeing from Walker and they just feel like, hey, this is really where we want to go with him in this direction moving forward. But I do feel like they're going to be intentional about finding a new committee member, because that's really how this pass rush was thriving last year. Them functioning as a group versus a couple of individuals dominating.
Yeah. Anybody else that stands out to you as a potential Falcons target that you'd be like, yeah, Ian was cooking? I know that's a bad statement to say about a Falcons general manager, because usually bad things happen when we talk about GMs cooking, but maybe we're turning over a different era, Trey.
Yeah, so somebody that I think will probably be there as at that third pick, the third round pick, would be a Ted Hurst, and that's another guy where I'm kind of like, all right, I don't think you're too worried about value in that range. He's somebody that I think, the team has a legitimate need for an X. And he's somebody that I think kind of fills that role. Has the traditional build, and, you get the Georgia State, you get somebody a bit local there. I think that's a pick that, if Ian was able to walk away with that at, I think it was at pick 79 as their third round pick.
Yeah.
I think he'd feel pretty good about that.
Okay. All right. Well, a couple of names to add to the list of prospects I got to do a little bit of a deeper dive on. I've seen some of Golday. I've seen quite a bit of Ted Hurst. I need to do more work on Skyler Bell. But certainly a couple of other names added to the mix for those of you to check out for this upcoming draft. But, with the draft coming up, let's ask the question of, what does a good draft class look like for the Atlanta Falcons? Is it one that's just filling needs? Is it one where they come out of here with, 2-3 starters, whatever? We'll get into that with Tre'Shon Diaz here as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. This time of year, financial stress is something that a lot of people are carrying right now. And it's not just about numbers. It can affect your sleep, your relationships, your overall mental health in ways that build up over time. And the reality is, struggling with money doesn't mean that you failed. Sometimes it just means that you haven't had the right kind of support. Given my predominantly male audience, we're always expected to be breadwinners and providers, and that can add an extra layer of stress, and that pressure can spill over into other areas of your life. Therapy isn't about financial advice. It's about working through the stress, the anxiety, the emotions that come with it. With over 30,000 licensed therapists and more than 6 million people served, BetterHelp is going to make it easier for you to get matched with a licensed therapist and start focusing on what you need. When life feels overwhelming, therapy can help. Sign up today and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/locked on. That's betterhelp.com/locked on. So before we continue today's episode with Tre'Shon Diaz, I want to let you guys know about the Everydayer Club, where you get a lot of perks, including some access to some sweet Locked On merch. Right, every day, people are like, Aaron, how are you so dapper? And I'm just like, I just rock a Locked On hoodie, and it's like, you're just so handsome. And it's just, I get complimented every single day. If you want to get complimented, if you want to step your wardrobe game up, man, the Everydayer Club is for you. And of course, you get that perk of sweet Locked On merch. So go check it out at the link in the description at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. So continuing here with Tre'Shon Diaz, my question, Trey, is, what does a good Falcons 2026 draft look like to you? Do you have a vision of it, or are you just kind of like, well, we'll just see and then we'll judge it later? Or, I try to, I know people don't believe me when I say stuff like this, but I try to be open-minded on this podcast. I know it's a crazy statement to say. And so it's just like, okay, there's many different ways to skin a cat. Is that kind of your approach to this draft? Or do you have much more of a sort of specific sort of vision for what a good 2026 draft haul looks like?
Yeah, I kind of am. I don't really have any specific expectations, just kind of based on the draft capital that they currently have. You're missing the first. You've only got 5 picks overall. So, I'm not sitting here being like, all right, they have to get, they have to get this corner here in the second round. That's going to be where the best opportunity to get a corner is going to be. And they need to then follow up by doing this or doing that. Kind of like you said, there's many ways to skin a cat. And so I'm definitely open to kind of seeing, what the team's approach is, how Ian's going to go about things. At the end of the day, if I'm looking at what is a result, I need the second round pick or the third round pick to be a legitimate year one contributor. I think if he walks away with at least one of those two, preferably both, preferably all 5 of them, but realistically, give me one of those two on those picks, and then somebody from day 3. I need someone from day 3 to contribute to the special teams unit for all 4 years. And we're not maligning it. We're not wishing that they weren't out there. We're just like, hey, look at that. Ian got this guy in the 6th round, and he's a legit special teams contributor. We can count on him. And for me, I think, the 40% hit rate right there, I guess, is what that would boil down to out of his 5 picks. If he can get that done in this first year, I can take a beat and kind of see how the other picks he goes about with, how those develop, what that turns into. But yeah, for me, that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Now, you mentioned something interesting when you talked about having a year one contributor. And I think about that from the very specific perspective of what happens if the Falcons take an offensive lineman early in the draft, where the expectation is that player won't be that much of a year one contributor. Obviously, injuries do happen and whatnot, but the Falcons starting 5 offensive linemen is pretty set, and really you would bring in an offensive lineman to come in and compete and push for a backup spot. But obviously, there would be a real opportunity for anybody that they draft, particularly early in the draft on the offensive line, to maybe be a plug and play starter in year 2, as opposed to year 1 with so many players, not named Chris Lindstrom's future along the offensive line very much in flux beyond the season. So I'm just curious, is there like an asterisk besides offensive line, or is that maybe a position that you're less enthusiastic about the Falcons drafting with an early pick because you won't necessarily get those immediate contributions?
No. See, that's why I gave him the option of one of the two.
Okay,
I'll get, I get it, Ian. You want to have that guy at pick 48 if it works out. If you get like Max Ian Hanker there at 48, somebody like that. Okay, Ian, I get it. Sure, that works. But then the 3rd round guy, I need that guy to be playing this year. If he wants to flip it, either way. And so, I kind of understand, like, with those picks, especially up there, the best player that he might see as an option is somebody that he doesn't necessarily think will get on the field till 2027. But that doesn't make it a bad pick. I can definitely understand the rationale for going that route. You want to, squeeze out, all the juice you have left from your current starting five and get somebody else ready to go. That's kind of a really good approach to building the O-line. So yeah, there's wiggle room there. And I that was built into the, the draft results for me.
Okay. I'm glad you provided that clarity. We're gonna have to work on your pronunciation of Max Ihanachor.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
I want it to be Anchor just because, like, an offensive lineman, his last name being Anchor, but hit it for me one more time, Aaron.
Ihanachor.
There we go. Max Ihanachor. It's locked in.
Okay.
I don't think he's going to be there at 48.
Yeah,
if he is, I will not forget how to say his name.
Yeah, it probably won't matter. But you talked a little bit about that special teams value, right? It is, I guess my question for you is, like, are you looking for singles and doubles, or are you looking for those big home run swings with this draft class? I mean, for me at least, obviously you kind of want to get like maybe one triple, maybe, if you get lucky, but maybe that's not necessarily you go up to the plate looking to make that big swing, because your limited draft capital means that there's a little bit more risk with that, right? Where you don't have as many resources to be like, oh, well, if we miss on this player, we can come back and later in this round and hit. And that is not necessarily the case. So I'm just curious, how does that impact your approach to the draft? Is it just getting singles, like a special teams player on day 3 or something like that is very much a single type player? Or do you want to see this team maybe swing a little bit more for a higher upside?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like with those special teams, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other. There's just kind of looking at this linebacker class, there's going to be a lot of really good athletes in those later rounds that I think you can make the argument for, like, all right, this is somebody who we know we can get on the field for special teams right away, and then we feel that we can get them up into the rotation by 2027. I just want to get on base. It's our first at bat, if you're Ian Cunningham. So right now it's like, I would love to call my shot and be like, we're going to start this off at pick 48 with a home run or a triple, but it might just be it might be a bunt, and if that's what it is, that's what it is. I think ultimately, when it comes down to it, Ian is just going to, I think my focus is these rookie contracts. I want to be able to enjoy, the rookie contract itself, this affordable player who's contributing out there in some form or fashion. And I think that's really the main goal as of right now for Cunningham, barring, kind of like you already alluded to, I feel like the triple is going to be like some offensive lineman. It's going to be some 2027 player where, you may not feel, the impact immediately, but that's a pick that you look back on and you're like, yeah, they knocked that one out of the park.
So there's still more to come on today's episode and talking about how the Falcons free agent haul impacts their draft. And, should we be worried about the best player available draft strategy and Kyle Pitts' future in Atlanta now that he's shown up as the offseason begins? We'll get into all of that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. What are your overall thoughts on the Falcons free agent haul? Do you feel like the Falcons did a good job to set themselves up well to execute whatever your vision and strategy for this draft is with their free agent moves? I believe 16 players added to the roster, as well as like 4 or 5 re-signings. Do you feel good about that free agent haul, or did it leave you a little bit lacking or wanting?
Yeah. Overall, it felt like a needs-based approach, and he didn't really have the appetite to, I think, want to lock into any one free agent beyond 2027. The 2-year deal was kind of like the ceiling for some guys. And so I think that plays into what Cunningham wants in the draft, which is flexibility. He does not want to let the needs dictate him throughout the draft. At least that's kind of how I see it based on how these moves have played out. I think he wants to have the ability to take that player that might be a 2027 player, might not be 2026 impact, or to, maybe even get a little risky and take a bigger swing in one of those later rounds because he's done, in his, eyes, a good enough job at filling, the depth and the base level of needs on this team. There's obviously still some needs, I think, that maybe stick out more than others, depending on who you ask. But at the end of the day, I think he did a good enough job in this free agency to give him the flexibility to move how he wants in this draft.
So it sounds like you don't think BPA is, a bad word.
No, I don't think BPA is a bad word, and I don't necessarily think that BPA means you ignore need. I think BPA just gives you the freedom to check, when you're at that spot. Okay, let's look at our board. How do we feel? Sure, we need a cornerback, but we feel like this is like the third best quarterback, fourth best cornerback available. But we've got, our highest ranked, center or offensive tackle or whatever, what have you, and kind of being able to maneuver that way. Because at the end of the day, I think every player's a need in a sense. Like for your football team, any position that can be upgraded, is a player worth taking.
Last tidbit, Kyle Pitts is reporting for duty. As signing his franchise tender of over $15 million. It's definitely more than $5 million. Over $15 million. He'll be attending the off-season program. You and I used to be on the same bandwagon when it came to, hey, Kyle Pitts is this underrated asset that the Falcons have, and they should be trying to maximize him, and he's better than people think, and blah, 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 blah. And now we're on kind of opposite sides of that, just because now I'm in the boat where it's like, well, now you got to pay him twice as much as you were paying him before. It's a little too rich for my blood. But as someone who, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Trey, but you seem to be still firmly on, hey, this is, still a extremely useful player for this Falcon team. I'm just curious. Do you see Kyle Pitts being a long-term asset here in Atlanta, that, this is step one of a multi-step process that ultimately ends with him getting a long-term contract extension here in Atlanta, but between now and, I guess, July technically, but also, I guess there will technically be another opportunity to sign him to a long-term deal after the season. So how do you sort of see the Kyle Pitts saga playing out?
Yeah. From what we've seen so far from Cunningham and just kind of what we've heard, the attitude seems to be like, we're going to let him play out on this tag. Cunningham's been kind of straightforward with a lot of like the inner workings of this offseason. He directly called out, extending Bijan and extending London after the draft and everything like that. And I'm like, oh, there's a name missing there. And which to me kind of, Ian is like, we've done what we're going to do with Kyle for this year. And so long-term outlook, it's hard to see Kyle being here long-term. I think that he might be more valuable in terms of like as a trade asset during the season. Then I think at this point, I don't necessarily know if anybody's going to be, wanting to take on, that $15 million price tag, which obviously can get negotiated at, into an extension at any time. But I don't think Pitts is going to, I don't think Pitts and his management are going to let the floor get too low in this offseason. And with the cap always increasing, it just kind of feels like the price is the price at this point. So, I do think that Kyle Pitts can be, a high-level contributor for this team, especially just kind of looking at the receiving options currently rostered. He's still, I think, one of, the second best option behind London. just kind of looking at, by the numbers. But I do think that his time is coming, and that this is probably going to be the last year. Unless Ian is just putting out a smoke screen, and they're working on that Kyle Pitts extension as we speak.
Yeah, I tend to be of like mind, but we'll see how it plays out. As you mentioned, I know there's going to be a lot of talk in the next 2 weeks about a potential draft day trade of Kyle Pitts. I don't see that necessarily on the horizon, but we'll see. We'll see. I do think if the Falcons do move on from Kyle Pitts at some point, it'll probably, as you mentioned, probably be closer to that trade deadline at the beginning of November. Because in theory, like, you wait till like 7 weeks into the season, like you'll essentially cut that $15 million in half for a team, which it probably, as you mentioned, makes it a little bit more amenable to a team. But kudos to the Kyle Pitts, doing the work, showing up. It'd be like, I'm going to be there. I'm going to do my best and put my best foot forward. And I think Kyle's approach this entire time has been, what was the thing that he said that he got in trouble? He's like, I just work here. Like,
Yeah.
Like, he's out here working. That's, you like to see that. Even though, people got on him for saying something.
What is this, just a career to him?
Yeah. So good on him for, showing up and doing all the things that he needs to do in order to put his best foot forward. And whether that increases his trade value, decreases his trade value, increases the probability that the Falcons decide to re-up with him, or he's just out here auditioning for another team to pay him buku bucks, this time next year. We'll just sort of have to see it all plays out. But Trey, any parting thoughts for us before we get out of here?
No, nothing for me. I just think it'll be an interesting draft. Just kind of seeing, what Cunningham and Matt Ryan have been cooking up.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for us here. Thanks to Tre'Shon Diaz. We will be joined hopefully by another Falcoholic contributor in Kevin Knight on tomorrow's episode to get his insights into the draft. And you don't want to miss that episode. So if you never miss an episode, the Everyday Club is built for you. Get Locked On Falcons ad-free, members-only Discord access, and of course, that sweet Locked On merch. You can find it all at the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.